Hello everyone, it's been a while since I've uploaded something, since there hasn't been that much development in the meta recently and I've been away for some tournaments, but I will be sure to bring you a new update with new decks that have emerged from this newest patch. But today I wanted to try something really different, since I've seen a lot of different takes on the nerfs and the buffs that we've had. We had a huge patch just recently on different social media platforms and streams. Some people saying it's terrible, some people saying it's great. I thought I'd try a completely different format, and I'll actually give a grade to every one of the nerfs and buffs that has transpired in the 26.04 patch. So I will be going through the patch notes, knowing what I know now a few days after. I'm going to give a grade to all of the nerfs and buffs, rating them, of course, from A plus to absolutely stellar to F completely failure. And I hope you guys are going to enjoy this one. And let's get that right into it. So firstly, we have the 26.04 patch. I'm, of course, going to only talk about standard updates. And they are, firstly, they're making some adjustment. And the first adjustment is a system update. So all Death Knights cards with 3 runes, like Triple Frost, like Frostworm's Fury, or Triple Blood, Vampiric Blood, those are like the 2 major ones that get discovered a lot, are now removed from all discover pools and random generation effects. This isn't really something new. We've seen this before a lot with, for example, quest cards. Quests could never be discovered randomly as spells, for example. And this isn't something new, but they're making this adjustment to slightly tone down the discover pool, because something that made Death Knight super powerful and to some degree also feel the rune selection a little bit less impactful is that classes could just pick and choose all the really good spells from all the other rune collections just by playing discover effects. And because the discover was so strong in DK, you would just run a lot of the discover effects in your deck. You can now only get cards which have 2 or less runes, which still has really, really powerful cards like the Scourge in there, which to me is still a little bit of an outlier. But I'm going to go and give this specific adjustment an A+, because I think this is perfect. I think DK is at the top of the charts, and it does have a little bit of a problem because you want to play new decks and you don't want to be playing the same decks all over again, and it's just something that's recently been introduced. But they had a really difficult challenge, right? They needed to introduce a class that is immediately competitive with all the other decks that have 6 total sets, right? A ton of cards to compete with. And then a few months later, in the next rotation, all the other classes lose a lot and this loses nothing, and you still need to be competitive. So at the same time, you were in the spot where people were like, I want to play the new class, this has to be powerful, but at the same time, they're not losing anything due to rotation, so you need to tune it down a little bit. And I think this is an A+ change, and I like this one a lot. And then we're going to go to card updates, and firstly, we're going to go through nerfs. Rowdy Fan only has 3 attack now instead of 4. I think this is really good nerf as well. It doesn't destroy the card itself. You can still play it in board-centric decks, but it makes the Lady Steno combo burst for a little bit less, which I think is very welcome effect. You could have also made Lady Steno not be able to go face, but that has to, like, it remains to be seen how good Demon Hunter really is. It does seem to be in a very powerful spot, and I don't like the play pattern of spell Demon Hunter, but that's I guess a personal thing. That's a me problem. Also, the auto-include in every more aggressive deck has been taken away from this card. I think this is a very good change. I would like to give this change an A as well. Then we have Overseer Frigidaire, which is now 3 instead of 5 attack. Frost Decay was the strongest deck on super high level, and they are nerfing the highest drawn win rate cards, which I think is a decent approach. You could have also nerfed Frostworm's Fury, but it doesn't seem to be that in the current meta this is super oppressive. Overseer Frigidaire was the most powerful card in the deck, and slightly toning down her attack I think is a good change, making it less of a threat in those kind of games. I do really like this change. I'll give this a 1 and A as well. I'm really happy with the nerfs so far. We will have to see if there needs to be more nerfs. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit more maybe in another video is about what changes I think I would have liked to see or what we would want to see in the future. But I think for now we should at least let the meta settle a bit, and I'll give my my thoughts on this a little bit at the end of the video as well, because that will tie everything together. But I like this nerf as well. Now we have the following card adjustments, and one thing I have to say about me giving out these grades is Blizzard of course works with the knowledge of what's coming up in the upcoming sets, and then sometimes you buff something and it's like decent, and then the next patch is like broken, and then people complain anyway. So I don't have the full knowledge here of what's coming, but I think being a high level competitive player, and I can give a very good opinion on what the grades are for these nerfs and buffs in the current meta, and I'm gonna just be evaluating them. So Rockmaster Voon, to me, making this 3 mana makes this a really powerful card. I think this is a lot more in the spirit of the card. One of like the payoffs, at 4 mana this was bad for tempo, but at 3 mana this has such a powerful effect that this is a card that makes me want to play a Menagerie deck in Warrior. So I think this is a good change. The card's not applicable because of the decks around it though, but I'm still gonna just go ahead and give this change an A- because I think this is the correct change. I think it just doesn't work out. Verse Rift, they made it 1 mana instead of 2. I'm going to give this one a B. I'm going to make this quick. Rifts, I don't think they're playable. I don't think they're going to be playable. I think they were a bad idea. I think the change is the correct change, but the card is still the card, so I don't think there's much else to say to this. Same for the Bridge Rift. The change is the correct change, but it's just not something we want to be playing with. Also, I don't think something we want to be playing with in the future. I'm just going to give this a B. Power Slider is now 2/3. This is an interesting one because it makes the card potentially extremely powerful in a curve kind of meta. This is a very dangerous one, and I do like that they're taking a risk here a little bit, because, for example, in the meta where decks like this are playable, this card can very easily be completely crazy. You just need to play like one type and it's already a 3/4 rush for 3 mana, so very good card. I do like that they're taking a lot of risks here, and that they're open to adjustments in the future. The archetype's still not playable, but I'm going to give this buff like a B+. Then Shield Block, I'm just going to give this buff a B as well. I think this is the correct way to buff the card. I think it's a very, very needed way to buff Warrior card draw and buff the Warrior class identity. This is a B+ or A- buff as well. I really like this buff. It just happens to be that the surrounding cards for a Control Warrior archetype aren't there. That still doesn't make the decision to buff this card bad. Even though this patch like this, I think this could have theoretically been like an A-graded buff, but the surrounding cards aren't there. So for me, the logic is that I'll give this a good grade because this is a good buff per se, but the surrounding archetypes aren't there, so I can't justify giving it a perfect grade. Frightened Flunky is now a 2 mana 2/3, which I think I'm gonna give this grade a C because I think it's super irrelevant. I don't see any way that this probably works. This is probably the way that the card should have been relieved. So in the core set, I think that's how the card should have been made when it came out. So I'm gonna give this a C because it's just correcting your failed old homework. Thori Belore, now it can revive infinite times instead of twice, which I think I'm gonna give this buff a D, because I think the problem with this is you don't have supporting fire spells that are good enough, and reviving this card more times has never been the problem of the card. I think if you wanted to make this card more powerful, it needed like one more attack, be like a 3 mana 4/3 rush or something like that to have like more immediate earlier impact. So I think that's what's the wrong way to buff this card. So I'm gonna grade this with a D. Infinitize the Maxitude. It's now old. It just discovered a spell and returned it to your hand, and now it's reduced the cost by 1 as well. I was thinking about making this just 1 mana, but this makes it a little bit harder for you to slot in while setting up future turns. I really like this buff. The card is also immediately applicable in some interesting decks. And I do think as long as there's like not... I think if this card gets randomly generated by other class, this is somewhat toxic. But at the same time, if this card is just played on Mage, I think this does a really good job at buffing this. So I really like this sort of buff. I'm gonna give it A- because it's like fringe playable, I think. Audio Splitter. I really like this buff as well. Makes it 2 mana 3/2. I've played this card before as a 3 mana 4/3, and it felt really, really underwhelming. So I think this was a good card to buff, especially since it's from the most recent expansion. I'm going to give this like a B plus as well, because sadly the power level isn't quite there yet for the card, and it doesn't seem to be fitting a deck, but I don't think it's the correct adjustment to make to the card. Then Spite Splash Siren is now a 4 mana 2/5 against instead of a 5 mana 2/6. So a lot of discussions about this. Certain people being like, nah, I don't want to see Naga Siren Mage again. I feel like this is a kind of hard one to buff, because it like, if this is good, is it toxic? If it's not good, is it meh? I think this is like not a good card. I think this is like a B minus kind of buff, because it makes the people happy that want to play this, but at the same time the deck is not good, and I don't think you hope the deck to be like super good again. Arcane Artificer is a 1 mana 1/3 now, which is funny because this works better in slower archetypes, but it doesn't kill itself with Deathborn anymore. It doesn't give you the Deathborn cores. The buff itself to me is totally fine. I like the buff itself like a lot, just because thematically I think it's good, though the card hasn't been working out yet. I'm still gonna give this a B plus for all of those. I like them a lot. All the buffs that I've seen so far, I really like them thematically. I would grade them higher. I mean, I'm giving them very good grades. I'm saying they're like Bs and As, but I would grade them higher, I think, if the cards were immediately applicable and playable, but the surrounding support isn't quite there yet. But thematically, I like those buffs. Stranglethorn Heart is now 8 mana, and I don't know. I'm gonna give this a C because I find this irrelevant. I don't understand why this would work. I think the archetype's bad. I think the buff is not nearly as relevant as it needs to be. I think this is the wrong card to address. And then they have Alderon Brightwing, which is now give all spells in your hand and deck spell damage, not just in your deck. I don't really think it works with the archetype. I think this is kind of a lost battle, and this was maybe not the card to buff in Hunter. I'm gonna give this a C as well, because I'm not very satisfied with what happened with Hunter. Jazz Pass, old 2 attack, 2 durability, now it's 3 attack, 2 durability. The alternative buff that's proposed by other people, for example Fino, is to make this a 2 mana weapon, because this curves a lot nicer with Lightning Storm or Feral Spirits and sets up really powerful tempo early game swings. There's the potential that this weapon would be too good at 2 mana 2/2, but the Overload Shaman archetype here is it's a bit weak, and I think at 3 mana this has a very difficult time at slotting in. I'm gonna give this buff a C because I feel like this is not what it needed. It probably needed to go down in mana. Even though the card would be really, really powerful, then I think it would have given Shaman a little bit more viability in the meta. I don't know what's going to happen in future patches. Maybe they were a little bit scared that it would be too good in the future, but for the current patch, I think buff the 2 mana 2/2 weapon would have been very powerful, but much better to bring Shaman back out of the really terrible spot that it's currently in. Then Altered Court, it now deals 6 damage lifesteal to a minion, costs 3 less if overloaded. I'm going to give this buff an F, because I think they clearly missed the mark here. The problem of this card wasn't the 6 damage compared to the 5, but rather the mana cost. Again, the card at 4 would be very good, but I think Shaman needs access to more good cards, and I think the clear buff that I would have made would make this card deal 5 damage for 4 mana and 3 less if overloaded. I think that would have been the much better choice for this card. But in the bad spread that they're in, this is really something they deserve. Then Flowrider, they made this a 1 mana 2/1 instead of a 2 mana 3/2, which makes it a much better card. I really like this buff. It makes the flow of the deck a lot easier to execute. And I think this is a very, very smart choice. I'm going to give this an A plus on the buff. I know it doesn't find immediate impact, but I think this is an incredibly smart way to do it. And I think if Shaman is playable, it will reap the rewards of this nice adjustment in the future. Lightning Storm is now Overload 1. I think this is a nice adjustment. The card's not really playable because the archetype isn't playable because we didn't make the other buffs that were necessary. I'm going to give this one a B. I think this was like overdue. I'm going to just give this one a B because I feel like we should have done with the rotation, and you don't get to reap the rewards for not doing your homework when it was due the first time. Crescendo is now 2 mana And Craze Conductor is now 4 mana 3/4. I think these cards should be looked at together. Both of these don't really seem play because the Warlock archetype with Imps isn't really something that lives up to the meta. I do think those are interesting buffs. I have the hardest time judging these two. I felt like I had a much better idea on how to rate most of the other buffs because I feel like I have a better concept of how they would work in the meta. Give this one a B and this one a C in terms of the buffs. Because I think it does help with what the archetype is supposed to do, but I'm not sure it will take off in the future. And then Siphon Soul, yeah, I'm going to give this one a shoulder shrug, because who really cares? Okay, Record Scratcher is now 3 attack and 2 durability. I think this is quite well for the combo archetype to work. Do not think that making this 2 mana would have been a good idea. I think this popping off too early and refreshing the mana would have been a bad idea. Buffing the attack on this weapon, I think, is exactly what you're supposed to do. The combo archetype hasn't taken off so far, which I think is more of a problem with surrounding cards rather than this buff specifically. I'm gonna go and give this one like a B minus though, because I feel like we kind of missed the mark on addressing this together in a package with other cards rather than just addressing this card specifically. Then we have MC Blingtron, which is, it was a 5 mana 3/4, and now it's a 5 mana 5/5. Battlecry, both players equipped with 1/2 microphone. Your opponent's is a broken microphone that increases all damage taken by 1. So I'm gonna be honest, first time I saw this buff, I was like, this is terrible. This is so bad. I wanted this at 4 mana as a 4 mana 3/4, because the problem with the card wasn't the mana. But the reason why I was thinking this is because I was thinking wrong about this card. The reason saying, well, this is a bad buff is because I wanted to play this in a more combo heavy archetype, maybe play it with Astalor or something at 4 mana and do some crazy combos. But the card wasn't that good in, I don't know, like a Miracle Rogue archetype, and I don't really think we want to be buffing Miracle Rogue. So I do think this is a good adjustment after all. After playing with the card a little bit in like a Secret Tempo Rogue, I feel like the 5/5 body makes this a lot more durable and makes this a much better tempo card. And it does a really good job of actually buffing other archetypes than Miracle Rogue, which is like, at this point, a rather old archetype that people are maybe a little bit tired of. I give this buff an A because I think I'm really happy with what they've done after seeing what impact it has on the decks that this can be played in. Then we have Holy Nova Priest is now 3 mana and doesn't go face anymore. I guess the card's playable. I thought maybe 4 mana, deal 3 damage to all enemies, minions, and then restore 3 to all friendly characters was a little bit better because it curves better and played better than 3 HP minion. I think this card's also useful at this. I'm going to give this an A minus because I'm very happy with this buff. And I think Priest can be in an okay spot. And we're going to see in the next few weeks if this is what Priest needed. But Priest will definitely need some time to figure this one out. It will also work better with Overheal, even though Overheal I think is not a good mechanic and I don't think it will take off. Alright, Kiri, this is a buff that I personally proposed, so I naturally have to give it a B because, but I think it will need some time for Druid to find inclusions of this card. Don't think it's immediately impactful for the meta, especially since Anub'aran is the one thing that's super broken in Druid, so you build your entire class around it because that's just kind of what you have to do. This one isn't impactful, but I think it's a nice thing to do. And then Death Blossom Wumper is now 5 mana 6/5. I do think this is a decent buff, and we've seen Jumper have some really good decks where you make like Death Rattle Druid. I'm going to give this one an A minus. I think this is actually a really good buff because it puts a new archetype on the table that we haven't seen before without making anything completely overpowered. And this is like exactly what you want for a buff. The only reason why I'm like not giving this a perfect score is of course because I feel like Druid is still too centered around some other cards, and I would have liked to see like a little bit more adjustments around these other cards in Druid as well. Yeah, and I think that is the end of the buffs. Let me know what you think about the grades that I've been giving out. That you like this video. Let me know what grades you would have been given. Let me know where you fundamentally disagree with me, or if you agree with me on my takes on the buffs and nerfs now that we've had a little bit of time to play with them. One thing I do want to say is that while the sentiment at the start has been that not much has changed and we're still kind of playing the same old decks, and I do agree that the frustration is a little bit that we're not seeing too much development, On the one hand, I would like to give it a little bit more time for us players to figure out maybe one or the other good decks, and some new archetypes are coming out and some are climbing. While at the same time, I want to acknowledge that the problem with this whole thing that we're in right now isn't really that the patch didn't do anything, because I don't think it's supposed to like shake up the meta 2 weeks after release. I don't think that's what you want. The problem is rather that throughout rotation we're kind of expected to play more powerful cards or more new cards in our decks rather than just like improving slightly on old concepts and playing mostly with old concepts. So I think we have two different problems that need to be addressed in certain different ways, maybe through some additional nerfs, maybe to older cards so some of the new stuff can shine. But I think the buff package in itself, even though it wasn't very impactful, I think the buff package itself, like this is not the problem. The problem lies somewhere else. Overall, if I had to grade the whole patch, I would like probably give it like a B minus, because I think there's a lot of really good decisions in the specific cards in there, but I do think it fails to address some problems that we had throughout the lack of diversity and rotation. And through some of the decks that we're seeing again that were kind of like unpopular at the start when they came out. So and they're like popping up at the top again and again and again with like very oppressive towards playing new fun stuff. So I think I do like most of the changes that they've made, but at the same time, it's been lacking some of this like introducing more new cards or taking away a little bit of power from the old archetypes to be able to give more new cards the ability to rise and shine a little bit. Yeah, so overall I'm going to give this one a B minus. Think it didn't do enough. It did do a little bit. I don't think it was terrible, but I also don't think it was like a super good patch. It kind of fell short of expectations. But at the same time, I think over the next few weeks, if we give this 2 more weeks, I think we're going to have a few new decks come up at the top that are going to be interesting to play, and they're going to change the meta, and they're going to make the game feel different. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to be enough to revert some of that sentiment. So thank you guys for listening to this rather long video, me grading all of your thing. Always remember that you're valuable and you matter, and I'll see you guys around on stream.